It was a cool afternoon in London. The breeze carried a gentle chill, and the sky was filled with soft gray clouds drifting slowly over St. James's Park. Birds fluttered from branch to branch, and a few tourists strolled lazily along the gravel paths, some sipping coffee, others snapping photos of the flowers or the pond. Everything about the day seemed calm, like the city was taking a deep breath and relaxing. Among the people walking that day was a man who moved a little slower than most. His steps were steady but careful, as if each footfall was a deliberate decision. His back was slightly bent with age, and his hands, thin but firm, clutched a wooden walking stick. His name was Walter Hughes, a 91-year-old retired soldier. No, not just a soldier, but a decorated World War II veteran. Walter wasn't just out for a walk. This was his daily routine. Every day, after lunch, he would put on his coat, always neat, always clean, and step out for a peaceful walk through the park. It wasn't just exercise, it was his way of staying connected to the world. And even, though he was getting older, he refused to let his age define him. He still had sharp eyes, a proud chin, and a calm expression that showed strength built over a lifetime. Today, like always, Walter wore a dark navy blazer with several military medals pinned on the left side. The medals shimmered softly in the daylight, each one representing courage, sacrifice, and a story of survival. Some people noticed them and gave him polite nods. A young boy walking with his mother pointed at Walter and whispered, "Mom, is he a soldier?" The mother smiled, nodding gently, and said, "Yes, darling, a hero." Walter smiled to himself. He didn't need attention. He didn't walk to be noticed. But every once in a while, someone's kind gesture warmed his heart. As he reached the bench near the edge of the lake, he paused. It was the same bench he sat on nearly every afternoon. He lowered himself slowly, carefully, with the help of his stick, and let out a soft sigh. The view was beautiful, ducks gliding across the water, children laughing in the distance, and the sound of the wind brushing through the trees. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering days from long ago, marching with his unit, hearing the distant sound of gunfire and the brotherhood of soldiers beside him. Just then, his memories were interrupted. He opened his eyes and noticed two young men standing by a nearby lamp-post. They looked out of place. While others walked by peacefully, these two seemed restless. They weren't enjoying the park. They were watching and whispering. Walter noticed one of them glance in his direction, then nudge the other. The second one smirked and said something under his breath. Walter couldn't hear it, but he knew that look. It wasn't curiosity or kindness. It was trouble. The two, young men, both probably in their early 20s, wore baggy hoodies and jeans. Their faces were sharp, not from experience, but from mischief. Walter had seen faces like that before, long ago in places where danger came quietly and quickly. He tried to ignore them and looked back at the lake, but he felt their eyes on him. He could sense their footsteps as they started walking toward him. His grip on his walking stick tightened, just slightly, not out of fear but out of instinct. Even at 91, Walter wasn't someone who panicked easily. "Hey, old man," one of them called out as they got closer. His voice had that mock playful tone, the kind people use when they're pretending to joke but actually mean harm. Walter turned his head calmly. "Yes?" he replied, politely but firmly. "You got any change on you?" the taller one asked, stepping closer. "You look like you've got a lot of old stuff. Maybe some coins, too." Walter shook his head. "No, I don't carry cash. Just walking." The shorter one laughed. "Walking? At your age? Shouldn't you be in a home or something?" Walter looked at them directly, not intimidated. "I walked across battlefields at your age. This park doesn't scare me." That sentence landed like a small bomb. For a second, the two thugs didn't know what to say. The confidence in Walter's voice threw them off. But instead of backing down, they smirked again. "Oh, a war hero, huh?" the tall one mocked, pointing at the medals. What are these? Little toys you collect? He leaned in as if to touch one. Walter immediately pulled back slightly. Don't touch that, he said, more serious now. But the thug didn't stop. Come on, Gramps, relax. We're just looking. The shorter one joined in, circling around the bench. Maybe we should help you home. It's dangerous out here for old folks. He laughed, but the laugh was cold. A few people walking by noticed what was happening, but no one stepped in. Some were unsure, others just afraid. It's easy to look away when something uncomfortable happens, especially when it's not clear whether it's serious or just boys being rude. But to Walter, this wasn't harmless. He had survived worse, yes, but disrespect cut deep. Not for himself, but for what those medals represented. His friends who didn't come back. The sacrifices made. The battles fought. He didn't walk the park every day to be harassed like this. Leave now, Walter said, not yelling, just stating it like an order. Before you regret it. The two thugs exchanged a look. They found it funny. An old man trying to sound tough. And that's when something strange happened. Behind them, from a few meters away, standing at full attention near the edge of the ceremonial courtyard, was a royal guard. Dressed in the iconic red uniform with the tall bearskin hat, he had been watching. Still, silent, unmoving. Royal guards are known for their discipline. They stand without flinching, no matter what happens around them. Tourists often try to distract them or make them laugh, but they never break focus. But this time, something was different. This guard's name was Corporal James Whitmore. He had been watching Walter since he entered the park. James had seen him before. Many times, actually. He admired the old man from a distance. He had once asked another guard about him and learned that Walter was a war veteran, known for walking the same path every day. James noticed the two young men approach. He saw the way they looked at Walter, the body language, the mocking gestures. And now, watching them surround the old veteran, something inside him stirred. A royal guard isn't supposed to move unless there's a clear threat to the public. But this was becoming one. From his position, James couldn't hear every word. But he didn't need to. The aggression in their posture, the way Walter pulled back, the clear discomfort. It was enough. James's fingers twitched, his jaw clenched slightly. He knew he had to make a decision soon. Back at the bench, Walter held his ground, but the situation was heating up. One of the thugs actually reached forward to try and touch the medal again. Walter stood up suddenly, not easily but strongly, and stared the young man in the eyes. "That medal is older than you," he said, "and worth more than your attitude." The thug raised an eyebrow. "Maybe we should take it. Sell it. Might be worth something." Walter didn't move. "Try it." Just as the taller one reached forward again, something behind him moved, fast and with purpose. Corporal James Whitmore had broken formation. Walter stood silently, steady on his feet despite his age. The two young men in front of him didn't know who they were dealing with, not in terms of physical strength, but something deeper. Walter had faced death, fear, hunger, and war in his lifetime. A couple of street thugs trying to intimidate him was nothing compared to what he had seen. But that didn't mean he would stay quiet if someone tried to insult him or his memories. The taller thug took a step closer. His name was Dean, and his partner, the shorter, more aggressive one, was Kyle. They were both in their early 20s, jobless, angry at the world, and always looking for someone weaker to push around. They thought an old man in a park would be an easy target. Kyle tilted his head and pointed at the medals again. "These must be real gold or something, huh? Old war stuff. Bet it's worth a few £100. Walter didn't move. "They're worth more than you'll ever understand," he replied. Dean laughed, the kind of laugh people give when they're trying to show they're in control. But there was something hollow about it. "Come on, don't be like that. We're just asking for a little respect. You look like a man with stories. Maybe we should take one of those medals as a souvenir. Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. You'll regret that. Kyle stepped around the bench, slowly circling Walter like a lion teasing its prey. He bent down and picked up the walking stick Walter had rested on the side of the bench. Old man can't walk without this, huh? Kyle said, holding it up like a toy. Should have stayed home today. Walter's expression didn't change, but his voice turned colder. Put that down, Kyle smirked. Or what? At that moment Walter straightened his back just a little. You could almost feel the soldier inside him rising. He wasn't afraid. He had seen bombs fall, bullets fly, friends die. These two were just loud boys with no purpose. I didn't come here to fight, Walter said, voice strong. But I won't let you take anything from me. Not today, not ever. Kyle swung the walking stick in the air like a bat. You think we're scared of some old man? What are you going to do? Tell your army friends? Dean joined in, pretending to salute. Sir, yes, sir. The two burst out laughing, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the cruel, mocking kind. The few people nearby began to notice what was happening more clearly. A young couple holding hands paused. A man with a camera turned his lens toward them but didn't click the photo. He wasn't sure if it was safe. Everyone was unsure. Should they help? Should they call someone? Or was it all just talk? Kyle moved closer. Let's see what you're hiding in those pockets, Grandpa. He reached for Walter's coat, but before he could touch anything, Walter stepped back with surprising speed. Even at 91, his body remembered how to respond to threat. He slapped Kyle's hand away, not with violence, but with strength. Thay, it shocked Kyle. Not because it hurt, but because he hadn't expected it. You really want to do this, old man? Kyle shouted, now angry. His pride had taken a hit. Dean stepped in now, more serious than before. Look, we were just messing around, but now you're asking for it. Walter held up his hand. No, I didn't ask for anything. You came to me. I've faced men much tougher than you, and they had guns, tanks, and hate in their hearts. You two? You're just lost. That hit something in both Dean and Kyle. No one likes being called lost, especially not when they know deep inside it might be true. Kyle growled and raised the walking stick as if to swing it. Not hard, but enough to scare Walter. And that's when a firm, commanding voice cut through the tension. Step away from him. Now! It wasn't loud, but it carried power. Like a wall had suddenly appeared between Walter and the two thugs. They both turned around fast. Standing just a few steps away was Corporal James Whitmore, the Royal Guard. Still in full ceremonial uniform, red coat, shiny black boots, tall, bearskin hat, but no longer still and silent. His hand rested near the hilt of his ceremonial sword, and his face was unreadable. He had seen enough, and he wasn't going to stand back anymore. Kyle frowned. What? You gonna scare us in that funny hat, soldier boy? James didn't respond to the insult. He took a calm step forward. I said, step away from him. Dean's laugh cracked. Oh, please, you can't even move, can you? Aren't you supposed to just stand there and look pretty? James didn't blink. I have every right to intervene when a citizen is being threatened. That man, he said, pointing to Walter, is a war veteran, and you're moments away from being arrested. Kyle backed up slightly. You're not even a real cop. James took another step forward. Try me. At that moment, a few tourists started recording. Phones came out. People whispered. That's a Royal Guard. He moved. Something's happening. Is that man okay? Dean wasn't laughing anymore. Neither was Kyle. The weight of the situation started to hit them. The red uniform, the confidence in James's voice, the way he stood. He didn't need to yell. He was calm. And that calm was more terrifying than any loud threat. Walter looked at James and gave a small nod. There was no panic in him. Only respect. Kyle threw the walking stick on the ground. Whatever, man. We were just messing around. Yeah, Dean added quickly. Didn't mean anything by it. James didn't move from his place. Then, walk away. Now. And pray. That's the end of it. They hesitated. For a second it looked like Kyle wanted to say something more, but Dean grabbed his arm and pulled him away. Let's go, he whispered harshly. People are watching. The two slowly turned and walked off, trying to act cool, but their speed increased with every step. Once they were out of sight, James turned to Walter. Are you all right, sir? Walter nodded. I've been through worse, but I'm grateful. Thank you. James bent down, picked up the walking stick, and handed it to him. You served? James asked softly. Royal Marines, Normandy, 1944. James stood a little straighter. Then it was my honor. Walter gave a small smile. Didn't expect to be rescued by a man in a bearskin hat today. James smiled too, just slightly. Didn't expect to move today, but some things are worth breaking tradition for. By now, several people had gathered around. A few clapped softly. A woman approached and asked Walter if he was okay. Another person offered to walk him home. But Walter simply nodded, thanked them, and said, I just need a moment. He sat back on the bench, letting the peace of the park return. The sun peeked through the clouds for a moment, casting light on the medals resting proudly on his chest. Corporal James returned to his post, but for the rest of the day, the crowd near his station was larger than usual. Tourists didn't try to make him laugh. Instead, they stood with quiet respect, knowing they had seen something rare. Not just a guard move, but a man choosing what's right over what's easy. And Walter, alone again but not forgotten, looked around and thought, to himself, the world may change, but there are still people who protect what matters. The next day, the skies above London were clear, and the sun lit up the city like a golden brush painting every street and tree with light. It was the kind of day that made even the busiest Londoners pause and breathe a little deeper. But for Walter Hughes, the 91-year-old veteran who had nearly been assaulted the day before, today felt different. He sat on the edge of his bed, dressed as always in a crisp shirt and trousers. His medals, though still polished, were now safely placed inside a wooden box on his desk. He had decided not to wear them today. Not because he was scared, Walter was never scared, but because yesterday had made him think. As he tied the laces on his shoes, his hands trembled just slightly. He paused, took a breath, and smiled to himself. Still steady, old man, he whispered. Still standing. Downstairs, he stepped outside his little townhouse. The same neighbors nodded at him as they always did, but today, their nods came with a little more warmth. News had traveled fast. Some had seen the video clips online. Others had heard the story from someone who was at the park. He was becoming more than just the old man who walked every day. Meanwhile, not too far away, inside the royal barracks near Buckingham Palace, Corporal James Whitmore stood at attention during morning inspection. His boots were polished, his uniform spotless, but there was a slight tension in his jaw. He was thinking about yesterday, about what he did. Technically, a royal guard is not supposed to break formation unless there's a real threat, and though everyone could agree that Walter had been in danger, some of the higher officers might still frown upon James's action. As expected, after inspection, he was called into the senior officer's room. Corporal Whitmore, said the officer, a man in his 50s with a cold stare. You moved during duty hours yesterday. Explain yourself. James stood straight. Sir, I observed an elderly civilian being harassed by two young men. He was cornered, threatened. I judged it as a serious enough risk to intervene. The officer looked at him for a long moment. Do you know what your uniform stands for, Whitmore? Yes, sir. Discipline. Honor. Protection. Protection, the officer repeated. And you believe you protected someone? I do, sir. Another long silence followed, but this time the officer's coldness softened a bit. Word has spread. There's video footage. It's gone viral. You acted against protocol, but with honor. There will be no punishment. Just be sure next time. Yes, sir, James saluted, and as he turned to leave, the officer added, Good work, Corporal. Outside, James exhaled slowly, the weight on his chest lifting. He wasn't a man who craved praise, but he needed to know he did the right thing, and now he felt certain. By mid-afternoon, Walter had returned to St. James's Park. No medals, no cane today. He wanted to walk just as a man, not as a soldier, not as a hero. But even without his medals, people recognized him. A young woman with a baby in a stroller paused near him. You're the man from yesterday, aren't you? The veteran? Walter smiled politely. Guilty as charged. Thank you, she said. My grandfather served too. He would have been proud. Tell him I said thank you, Walter replied. She looked down. He passed a few years ago. Walter's eyes softened. Then I'll thank him myself one day. As the woman walked away, Walter sat on the same bench from yesterday. He looked around. Calm lake, birds chirping, people smiling. It was peaceful again. But something had changed. Suddenly, from behind him, he heard footsteps. Familiar, sharp, purposeful. He turned. It was Corporal Whitmore, off duty now, dressed in casual clothes but still carrying the same upright posture of a soldier. Walter stood slowly. Corporal? Mr. Hughes, James said, extending a hand. May I sit? Of course. The two men, one old and weathered by life, the other young and proud in service, sat together under the tree's shade. I wanted to check on you, James said. After yesterday? I'm fine. My pride's still intact, and my knuckles didn't break when I slapped that boy's hand. James chuckled. That was impressive. Walter looked at him seriously. So was what you did. Guards like you, supposed to stand still, not move an inch. But you moved. James nodded. I couldn't just watch. Something about it. It didn't sit right. Watching you stand there alone, surrounded by those punks, it felt wrong to do nothing. Walter smiled. You did the right thing. And, not just for me, for everyone watching. You reminded them what real service means. The two sat in silence for a while, watching ducks float in the pond. After a moment, James asked, Do you come here every day? Every day since I retired. My wife used to walk with me. She passed 10 years ago. I kept coming. It helps. James listened carefully. If you don't mind me asking, which regiment were you with? Royal Marines, Walter answered. Landed in Normandy 1944. Lost half my unit in the first week. Made it through somehow. James looked at the ground, humbled. My grandfather served in Normandy. He used to tell us bedtime stories that weren't really bedtime stories, more like lessons. Walter nodded. War teaches you everything, too fast. How to survive, how to lose, how to live with ghosts. James asked softly, Does it ever get easier? Walter looked at him, then at the sky. No, but you learn to carry it. Like a backpack that gets heavier as you get older. But you still carry it, because it's yours. James nodded. At that moment, a small group of children passed by. One boy, maybe 10 years old, stopped and looked at Walter curiously. Then he whispered to his mother, who smiled and nodded. The boy walked up shyly. Excuse me, sir, are you the soldier from the internet? Walter blinked. I suppose I am. The boy held out a folded piece of paper. I drew this for you. Walter unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing, a simple one. It showed a soldier with medals, standing next to a man in a tall hat. Underneath, in wobbly letters, were the words, Thank you for protecting him. Walter's hands trembled, not from age, but from emotion. He looked at the boy and smiled. "Thank you, son. That's the finest piece of art I've ever received." The boy grinned and ran back to his mother. James looked at Walter. "You've started something." Walter shrugged. "Didn't plan to, just came for a walk." That evening, as the sun dipped below the city's skyline, Walter returned home. But something had changed. Waiting at his door was a letter, hand-delivered. He opened it slowly. The envelope was thick, official-looking. Inside was a personal note from the palace. "Dear Mr. Hughes, we have seen the footage and heard the story of what happened in St. James's Park. The bravery and dignity you showed, even in the face of disrespect, is a reflection of the very spirit this nation stands for. We are proud to count you among our heroes. You are hereby invited to the Queen's Garden reception next month as a guest of honor. With respect, Lieutenant Coley H. Langdon, Office of Royal Affairs." Walter stared at the letter, heart thumping. He hadn't expected praise. He hadn't asked for recognition. But now, something inside him felt deeply, quietly honored. He sat down in his chair, placed the letter beside his medals, and leaned back. The day had changed everything. In one moment of courage from a young guard, and one moment of calm strength from an old man, the world had been reminded of something important: respect, honor, and the quiet strength of those who carry the past not with anger, but with pride. And that story was only just beginning. Walter Hughes woke up early, just like he had every day for decades. But this morning felt different. There was a strange calmness in the air, like the world had taken a soft breath before speaking. The letter from the royal palace still rested, on the table beside his armchair. He had read it at least 20 times since receiving it. Each time he'd smile and shake his head. "I didn't do anything special," he often whispered to himself. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger, about respect, history, memory, and something many had forgotten: dignity. That morning, as he sat in his kitchen, sipping tea from his old chipped cup, the doorbell rang. Walter wasn't used to visitors, especially not this early. He stood up slowly and walked to the door. When he opened it, a man and a woman stood outside. Both were in formal clothing. The man held a notepad. The woman carried a camera. "Mr. Hughes?" the man asked politely. "Yes." "I'm Peter from the Times, and this is Alicia, our photographer. We were wondering if we could talk to you for a story about what happened in the park. People want to hear more." Walter hesitated. He didn't like being in the spotlight. But after a moment he nodded. "Come in. Tea?" Minutes later they sat in his living room, surrounded by shelves, full of books, old photographs, and war memorabilia. Alicia quietly took pictures of the room. His medals, a photo of Walter and his wife when they were young, and the drawing the little boy had given him in the park. Peter leaned forward. "Mr. Hughes, people saw the video. You stood up to 2 young men harassing you, and you did it with calm and dignity. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't fight. You simply stood your ground." "Why?" Walter looked down at his hands. They were wrinkled, veined, but still strong. "I've seen what happens when people fight with hate," he said softly. "I saw it during the war. You don't win anything when you answer hate with more hate. But if you stay calm, if you speak from a place of truth and strength, it shakes them. They don't know how to handle it." Peter nodded, scribbling every word. "Did you expect the Royal Guard to step in?" he asked. Walter chuckled. "Not at all. Thought I was on my own. But when I heard that voice, sharp and steady, it was like hearing a drum before a battle. I knew I wasn't alone anymore." Alicia spoke up. "What went through your mind when the Guard broke formation?" Walter smiled. "That some traditions are worth breaking, for the right reasons." By the time they left, Peter thanked him warmly. "You've inspired a lot of people, sir. This isn't just a story about an old man and 2 punks. It's about respect. about service. People forget what it means to earn respect the hard way. Walter nodded. He had heard a lot of kind words over the last few days, but he didn't let it go to his head. Praise fades. What matters is what stays behind when people stop clapping. Later that day, he received another visitor, this time Corporal James Whitmore. "Evening, sir," James said, smiling as Walter opened the door. "You again?" Walter grinned. "I'm starting to think you're stalking me." James laughed. "I thought I'd walk with you, if that's all right." Walter picked up his coat and hat. "Always room for a soldier." The two began walking through the familiar park, the evening sun casting long shadows over the path. Children played in the distance. An old couple sat feeding birds. Everything looked normal, but something had shifted. As they walked, James looked at Walter. "You've become a bit of a legend, you know." "Legends are for books," Walter replied. "I'm just a man who didn't move." "That's exactly why they're calling you a legend." They walked in silence for a few minutes. Then Walter stopped near a small memorial stone. It was old and cracked, with moss creeping along the sides. At the base were faded words, "To the forgotten soldiers." Walter stared at it for a long moment. "I come here sometimes," he said. "Not many know about this one. The names here, they're men I knew. Boys, really. Never made it home. I talk to them sometimes." James looked at the stone, too. "Do they answer?" "Sometimes," Walter said. "Not in words, but in feelings. When I feel like I'm losing my way, I come here. They remind me who I am." James stood quietly beside him. He didn't need to speak. Some silences are better than words. Suddenly, a voice broke the quiet. "Excuse me, sirs?" They turned. A young teenager stood there holding a small notepad. He looked nervous. "My name's Sam. I'm doing a school project about World War II. They told us to find a real story. I heard about you, sir. What happened in the park? Would you mind telling me your story?" Walter smiled kindly. "You're standing in the middle of it, son." The boy looked confused. Walter placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "The war isn't just about what happened in 1944. It's about what we carry today. The courage to stand up for what's right." "That's the story," Sam nodded slowly. "Can I take a photo of you both? For my report?" James looked surprised. "Both of us?" Walter smiled. "He's the other half of the story." Sam took the photo, Walter standing next to James, in front of the old memorial stone. Soldier and guard, past and present. The picture would one day hang in the school hallway under a title Sam hadn't yet thought of, but that photo would say everything as night began to fall. Walter returned home, but something awaited him. Another envelope. This time it came with a golden seal. Inside was a second letter, not from the palace. This one came from the Prime Minister's office. "Dear Mr. Walter Hughes, your recent display of calm courage and dignity has deeply touched the heart of our nation. We often talk about British values, respect, strength, service, but you showed them, quietly, without asking for praise. We would be honored if you would agree to share your story publicly at the upcoming National Veterans Day as a keynote speaker. With deep respect, R.T. Houghton, Elaine Dawson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom." Walter's hands trembled slightly as he held the letter. Him? A speaker? In front of hundreds? Maybe thousands? He laughed softly to himself. "And here I thought I came here to be left alone." He placed the letter beside the one from the palace. For a moment he stared at both, symbols of a strange kind of fame. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that sneaks up on you when you do something right. That night he called James. "You busy?" Walter asked. "Not at all, sir. I've been asked to speak on Veterans Day." James whistled softly. "That's huge." Walter paused. "Would you stand beside me that day?" James didn't hesitate. "With honor." As the days passed, the buzz around Walter continued. More news channels called. Interviews were requested. A short documentary was even announced. But Walter chose carefully. He wasn't chasing attention. He was chasing understanding. He knew this moment wasn't just his. It belonged to every soldier who'd ever been forgotten, every elder who'd ever been disrespected, every tradition that had once meant something but had faded in modern noise, and every person who still chose to do the right thing, even when it was hard. His walk through the park every morning became a small event. Children waved. Tourists asked for photos. Veterans saluted him. Young people, who once ignored men like him, now slowed down, watched, and listened. Walter never acted. Like a hero, that's what made him one. And though he never asked for attention, he began to realize something important. The moment in the park, that moment where two thugs tried to make him feel small, had become the start of something far bigger. It was a reminder that courage isn't always loud, that some uniforms are made of fabric, and some are made of time. That respect can be forgotten, but it can also be restored, and that when an old man stands tall, the whole world sometimes stops to notice. The big day had arrived. Walter Hughes stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom. He was wearing his full military uniform for the first time in many years. His medals were shining, carefully pinned to his chest. His jacket fit just a bit tighter than it used to, but he didn't mind. He looked proud, strong, like the soldier he had always been. Outside, a black car with two small flags on the front waited for him. It had been sent by the government to bring him to the National Veterans' Day ceremony in London. Thousands of people were expected to attend. Politicians, soldiers, citizens, school children, and even the royal family. Walter adjusted his collar and looked at a small photo on his desk. It was a picture of his late wife, Mary, in her 20s, smiling warmly. "I'll try not to make a fool of myself, love," he whispered with a soft smile. As he stepped outside, Corporal James Whitmore was already waiting by the car, dressed in full Royal Guard uniform, tall and firm like always. "You ready, sir?" James asked. Walter gave a small nod. "I've fought in real battles, son. This can't be worse than Normandy." James smiled. "Well, the press might be worse than the Germans." The ride to the ceremony was quiet at first. Walter looked out of the window at the city. The streets were clean, flags waved gently in the wind, and people gathered along sidewalks. Many recognized him and clapped or saluted as the car passed. Walter wasn't used to that, but he didn't feel like a celebrity. He felt like someone holding a message, one that needed to be heard. At the event grounds, a large open-air stage had been set up near the base of a war memorial. Hundreds of chairs had been arranged neatly, and a red carpet led to the stage. Behind it, a giant screen showed photos of soldiers from every war the country had ever fought. Walter was led to the stage, escorted by two military officers and James walking beside him. The crowd stood and clapped as he appeared. It was loud. Some people even wiped away tears. He could see young people in school uniforms sitting quietly. He saw old veterans with canes, proudly wearing their caps. He saw mothers with children, holding small flags. And at the front row, sitting with calm dignity, were members of the royal family, including the Queen herself. Walter took a deep breath as he reached the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces. Then he began to speak. "I was born in 1933, he said, his voice clear and steady. "I grew up when the world was at war. I was barely a teenager when I first held a rifle. I was 19 when I landed in Normandy. I didn't think I'd live to see 25, but I did." He paused, looking around. "I didn't become a soldier because I wanted to fight. I became a soldier because someone had to protect what mattered. And I stayed alive because I had people worth coming home to." The crowd listened in silence. No coughs, no whispers. Just the soft sound of the wind. Many of the men I fought beside never came back. Their names are carved on stones in cemeteries, but they also live here. He tapped his chest. Inside every soldier who remembers. He paused, then smiled gently. Last week, I was walking in a park, just like I do every day. Two boys came up and tried to scare me. Maybe they thought I was weak. Maybe they thought they were strong. But what happened next reminded me that this country still remembers what's right. He looked toward James, who stood in the front row. A young man in a tall black hat broke every rule to do what was right. Not because someone told him to, but because he knew that respect isn't something you wait for. You give it when it's needed most. A wave of murmurs passed through. The crowd, soft, emotional. Walter continued, I didn't speak today to be praised. I didn't come here to be clapped for. I came here because I wanted to tell every young person out there, bravery doesn't always look like a man with a gun. Sometimes it looks like a man who stands still when others fall, or a guard who breaks the rules to protect what's right, or a child who says thank you when no one else does. He paused again, his voice growing quieter but deeper. If you ever wonder what kind of person you should be, don't try to be famous. Don't try to be loud. Try to be kind. Try to be steady. Try to be someone that the world can trust. The crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Walter stood quietly as everyone clapped, not smiling for the praise, but proud that his words had landed where they needed to. After the ceremony, many people came to speak with him. Veterans saluted him. Children hugged him. Government officials shook his hand, but the moment that touched him most was when a teenage boy approached him, holding something in his hands. Sir, the boy said nervously, I watched your speech. With my dad. He's a soldier too. He told me to give you this. It was an old medal. Bronze, slightly tarnished. He said his grandfather got this in the war. He wants you to have it. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the medal. I can't take this. This is your family's history. The boy shook his head. He said you've reminded people why these medals mean something. He said you've earned it, just for that. Walter blinked back tears and nodded. Tell your father I said thank you. From one soldier to another. That night, back home, Walter sat quietly in his armchair. James sat across from him sipping tea. You were brilliant today, James said. They'll be talking about that speech for years. Walter chuckled. I just said what needed to be said. James looked thoughtful. You know, something's changed. Since that day in the park. Young people are stopping to listen. They're asking questions. Even some of my fellow guards are looking at things differently. Walter nodded. Change doesn't start with shouting. It starts with moments. One person doing the right thing, and another watching it happen. He reached over to the shelf beside him and placed the boy's medal next to his own. Now that, he said, is the highest honor I've ever received. The two men sat quietly for a while. Then James asked, Do you think your wife would have been proud? Walter looked up at the ceiling, his eyes soft. She always said, Do what's right, even when no one's watching. I think she'd be proud that someone was watching this time. In the days and weeks that followed, the story continued to spread. Schools added the video of Walter's speech to their history lessons. A statue was commissioned in the park. Two figures, one an old soldier, standing tall, and the other a guard stepping forward, hand outstretched. People from all over the world visited it. And every morning, Walter Hughes continued to walk through that same park. He didn't wear his medals. He didn't carry the letters or the awards. He didn't need to, because the world had already seen what mattered. They had seen the strength of a quiet man, the courage of a young guard, the kindness of strangers, and the truth that respect, once lost, can always be found again. If someone is brave enough to remind the world what it looks like, Walter had become a symbol. But more than that, he had become a reminder that no matter how old you are, no matter how forgotten you feel, one moment of dignity can light up the world, and sometimes the smallest actions, like standing still or speaking softly, become the ones that change everything.